In a world where compassion often takes a back seat to profits, one woman's act of kindness would shatter the system built to exclude those in need. Camille Brooks, a dedicated nurse at Rosebridge Memorial Hospital, never imagined saving a man's life would cost her everything. Fired and humiliated, she was forced to confront a broken healthcare system that valued wealth over humanity. But in the face of adversity, Camille didn't just walk away. She stood tall, igniting a revolution that would change the course of healthcare forever. This is the incredible true story of a woman who turned injustice into a force for good, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from revenge, but from building something far greater. Join us as we follow Camille's journey from fired nurse to national hero, and discover how one act of compassion reshaped an entire industry. The air inside Rosebridge Memorial Hospital's grand lobby was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were bracing for impact. "You're terminated, Ms. Brooks. Leave your badge and your coat. Now." The voice of Director Malcolm Greaves thundered through the atrium, silencing the shuffling of papers, the soft murmur of patients, even the beep of distant monitors. All eyes turned toward Camille Brooks, a 38-year-old black woman with 10 years of impeccable service, now standing frozen beneath the harsh, fluorescent lights. She didn't flinch. Her posture remained proud, her expression unreadable, but her fingers trembled as they reached up to remove her pristine white coat. The security officer, Curtis Wells, a man who used to greet her with respect every morning, averted his gaze as he moved to escort her. Serious breach of hospital protocol. Greaves growled theatrically, pacing behind the reception desk. Unauthorized medical procedure. Misuse of critical resources. Treated an unknown vagrant without payment, insurance, or consent. He emphasized each accusation as if reading from a script written with venom. "People like you never understand boundaries in an institution like this." The words echoed louder than the room itself. People like you. Camille had heard them before, not always spoken aloud, but whispered in denied promotions, in the way meetings went silent when she walked in the long road she'd climbed to earn even an ounce of respect in this marble palace of medicine. "Director Greaves," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I saved a man's life. He was bleeding out on the floor. No ID, no insurance, no next of kin. Just the words, 'Please help,' before he passed out." But Greaves slammed his palm on the counter. "And you wasted this hospital's resources on a nobody." His voice rose. "This is a place of standards, not a charity for the homeless." The onlookers didn't speak. Some winced. Others watched, transfixed by the spectacle. Camille slowly placed her badge beside her coat and turned to leave her heels clicking steadily against the polished floor. As she reached the revolving doors, a quiet but ominous silence followed her. It wasn't just the loss of a job. It was an execution of dignity. But none of them, not Greaves, not the staff, not the patients, could have imagined that the man she fought to save the night before was not some vagrant. That beneath the dirt and blood, he wore a watch worth more than most of their annual salaries. That within 24 hours, this very lobby would no longer belong to Malcolm Greaves, but to her. It was just past 11 p.m. When Camille Brooks glanced at the wall clock above the nurse's station, her shift minutes away from ending the hum of fluorescent lights mixing with the low buzz of late-night quiet. She had already begun wrapping up paperwork when the automatic glass doors at the entrance whooshed open, cutting through the stillness with urgency. A man staggered inside, tall, disheveled, his clothes shredded, soaked in blood and mountain dirt. His right hand clutched his side, his breathing shallow and erratic, and before anyone could react, he collapsed onto the cold tile floor. "Please, help," was all he managed before unconsciousness took him. For a second, no one moved. Brittany, the young receptionist with flawless makeup and nails that glowed under the lights, didn't even stand up. She glanced at the man, sneered, then muttered, "No insurance, no treatment. He's not our problem." Camille didn't hesitate. Her instincts roared louder than any policy manual. She dropped her files, rushed to the stranger's side, knelt down and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. A weak pulse, barely there. "He has possible internal bleeding, irregular breathing, likely head trauma," she said sharply. "We don't have time," Camille Brittany called out lazily, not even putting down her phone. "You know the rules. No ID, no coverage, no ER access. That's Greaves' standing order." Camille didn't look back. To hell with the rules. This man is dying. She barked orders like a battlefield commander. Call Dr. Herrera, prep trauma, room 2, get me oxygen and a crash cart. Now, a few interns looked at each other, frozen. One of them, new and unsure, finally obeyed. Camille began CPR, applying pressure to the man's chest while simultaneously clearing his airway. Her uniform soaked in his blood. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from urgency. Time blurred. The patient had no name, no wallet, no apparent past. But to Camille, he had one thing that mattered, a beating heart on the verge of stopping. She didn't notice the whispers, the judgmental stares from others behind the glass, the way Brittany scoffed and muttered, "She's going to get herself fired for this." Because in that moment, none of it mattered. Only life did. And Camille, despite the storm she didn't yet know was coming, chose to stand in front of it with nothing but her courage and a stethoscope. The morning after felt like an emotional hangover. Camille's car rolled slowly through the narrow lanes of Southside Chicago, past boarded-up stores and flickering street lamps still clinging to the dawn. She gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her uniform wrinkled her eyes dry from a night with no sleep, and a soul weighed down by humiliation. The echoes of Malcolm Greaves' voice still rang in her ears. People like you, venom, disguised as professionalism. Pulling up in front of her modest apartment, she turned off the engine and sat in silence. But before she stepped out, her eyes drifted across the street toward a spot she had unconsciously looked at every day. The corner where old Ray Scruffy, harmless homeless man, usually sat with his tattered coat and hand-drawn sign. Today that corner was empty. No Ray, no sign. Nothing but an eerie stillness. Camille's eyes narrowed. Something was off. As she turned toward her apartment, she caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of her vision. In that very same spot, now stood a sharply dressed black man in a custom navy suit, polished shoes reflecting the early morning sun, speaking into an earpiece while checking a phone that looked more like a mini computer. He stood too confidently, too purposefully. And for the briefest of seconds, he turned and looked directly at Camille. His gaze wasn't curious. It was calculating, deliberate, as though he knew exactly who she was. Then he turned back and walked away. Camille stood frozen on her porch step, her keys dangling from her fingers. The contrast was jarring last night. A man drenched in blood and mud collapsed at her feet. This morning, a man stood at the exact same spot, unrecognizable, yet vaguely familiar, with the air of someone who had never been ignored in his life. She shook off the feeling and stepped inside, not knowing that in that very moment, forces far larger than her were already in motion. What she thought was the end was only the ignition. The man she saved wasn't just any stranger, and that brief eye contact wasn't a coincidence. It was a signal, silent but thunderous, that everything was about to change. Camille had barely set her purse on the kitchen table when her phone buzzed violently across the surface, lighting up with the same unknown number that had already called 3 times in the past hour. Still in her wrinkled uniform, hair pulled back in a tired bun, she hesitated. Then something in her gut told her to pick up Ms. Brooks. "This is Jalen Cross, lead counsel for Turner, Global MedTech. We need to speak immediately regarding the patient you treated last night." Camille froze. "If this is about a lawsuit, I only did what?" No, Cross interrupted firmly, his tone professional but urgent. "On the contrary, the man you saved, his name is Elijah Turner." The name hit her like a sudden drop in blood pressure. Her knees weakened. "Elijah Turner, as in founder and CEO." Cross confirmed, "One of the most powerful figures in American healthcare. And let's just say, your decision last night did more than save a life. It lit a fuse. He wants to meet you today." Camille clutched the phone, her thoughts scattering like broken glass. Her entire world had been torn apart 12 hours ago, and now a corporate lawyer was telling her she had saved the most influential man in medicine, while her employer had tossed her aside like she was nothing. Where, she asked softly, "Downtown 40th and Lakeview Cafe, Verona, in 1 hour." The line went dead. Camille stared at her reflection in the microwave door, her eyes wide with disbelief. Last night she had listened to instinct instead of rules. Today that instinct might just be the key to unlocking a secret that would upend everything, not just for her, but for the very institution that destroyed her. And if Elijah Turner really was who they said he was, then Rosebridge Memorial had just picked a fight with the wrong nurse. Cafe Verona was nothing like the diners Camille was used to. This place gleamed with glass walls, marble countertops, and the scent of imported espresso. She stepped inside nervously still, in her faded hospital scrubs, stripped of her lab coat, but not her dignity. At the far end, seated in a corner booth with a leather briefcase and a half-empty cappuccino, was a sharply dressed man who stood the moment he saw her. "Camille Brooks," he asked, extending a hand. "Jalen Cross." She nodded and sat across from him, her heart pounding louder than the cafe's ambient jazz. He slid a sleek tablet across the table, and when she looked down, her breath caught. On the screen was a high-resolution photo of a clean-shaven, sharply suited man standing behind a podium at a global medical summit. "That's the man you saved last night," Jalen said, Elijah Turner. Every scratch, every drop of blood, every collapsed lung was his. His, until you changed the outcome. Camille stared in stunned silence. Why was he alone? "Dressed like a... Elijah has this habit," Jalen replied. "When the pressure gets too much, he disappears, leaves security. The board, even his assistant. It helps him think. Clears his head. Yesterday he went hiking in the Appalachians and took a wrong step near Devil's Ridge. He crawled for hours trying to reach the nearest hospital. That hospital was yours." Camille blinked her mind, racing. All the judgment, the insults, the termination over a man they thought was worthless. And he was one of the wealthiest men in America. "He remembers everything," Jalen added. "Your voice, your hands. The way you shouted for help when no one else moved. And now he wants justice." Camille's hands tightened around her cup. "Justice? Yes, but not revenge." Jalen said, "He doesn't want a lawsuit that fades into bureaucracy. He wants to expose a system, one that values insurance over integrity and rules over lives." Camille looked away for a second, her jaw tight. "They broke me," she whispered. "They made me feel like I was nothing." Jalen leaned forward. "That ends today. But we have to be smart. Greaves has political ties. If we want this to stick, we don't shout, we strike." And as Camille sat in that polished booth, sunlight slicing through the window like divine irony, she realized the war she'd been drafted into wasn't about her anymore. It was about something far bigger, and she wasn't the victim. She was the match, while Camille returned home to stacks of unpaid bills and the numbness of unemployment downtown. Chicago was already pulsing with quiet urgency. Inside a penthouse suite at St. James Medical Tower, Elijah Turner lay in a private recovery bed, hooked to IV fluids and cardiac monitors, but his mind was crystal clear. With a tablet in hand and fire in his voice, he dictated orders to his legal and investigative team. "I want everything on Malcolm Greaves, every denied patient, every discriminatory complaint, every email he's ever sent to city officials. I want to know where the money went." His assistants nodded without question. Meanwhile, at Rosebridge Memorial, Greaves reveled in his perceived victory. He summoned department heads to an emergency staff meeting, standing proudly beneath a projector slide that read, "Maintaining order and policy." "This is what happens," he announced smugly. "When protocol is violated, Ms. Brooks is no longer with us, and let that be a warning to all." Some staff applauded, especially Brittany, whose petty clap echoed louder than her acrylic nails. But not everyone joined in. Dr. Luis Herrera sat at the back, his fists clenched beneath the table. He had seen Camille's devotion, her sacrifice, the way she stayed late for patients no one else would touch, and something inside him snapped. Outside the hospital, an unmarked van circled the building. Inside it, a surveillance team from Turner Global began pulling archived security footage, accessing HR records, and quietly tapping into the internal server. They weren't just looking for errors. They were building a case so airtight it would collapse Rosebridge from the inside. Camille, unaware of the full scale of what was unfolding, sat at her dining table, reading messages from former co-workers. Some silent, some cruel. One caught her eye, a message from Curtis Wells, the security guard who had looked away in shame as he escorted her out. "Dr. Brooks," it read, "I think you should see this. The security system records audio too." Attached was a time-stamped file. She clicked play, and the words that followed made her blood run cold. Malcolm Greaves' voice, clear as day, sneered through the speaker. That arrogant black woman needed to be cut loose. She saved a damn street rat. Perfect excuse to get rid of her. Her hand trembled as she paused, the audio fury and disbelief knotting in her chest. It wasn't just about policy, it never had been. It was about control, about race, about power. And in that moment, with a laptop in front of her, and the city humming with buried truths, Camille understood the storm had arrived, and this time, it wasn't hers to weather. It was Greaves' turn to drown. The next evening, Chicago glittered under the illusion of calm, but beneath its surface, pressure was mounting like a storm pressing against glass. Inside a luxury brownstone, just blocks from City Hall, Elijah Turner reviewed a set of documents highlighted in red. 89%, he muttered, voice razor sharp. That's the percentage of Black and Latino patients without premium insurance denied at Rosebridge in the last 5 years. And yet, somehow donations to the city commissioner Greaves' sister-in-law spiked every quarter. He looked up. Find the link, find the receipts. His team nodded grimly. Back at Rosebridge, Greaves basked in false security, enjoying champagne at a private charity dinner, gloating to investors about eliminating problem staff. He raised a toast. Profit margins are up 15% this quarter. We've streamlined inefficiency, especially the kind that thinks with emotion instead of policy. What he didn't know was that the young server refilling his glass was wearing a micro camera clipped discreetly to his lapel, broadcasting every word to a secure law office 3 blocks away. Meanwhile, Camille received another message from Curtis. That wasn't the only recording it read. Attached was a clip from the HR archives on screen. Greaves leaned back in his office chair, smirking. Brooks is too proud. Always has been. Thought she could change things. But she forgot. This place runs on hierarchy, not heart. Then, like a punch to the gut, came the kicker, and firing her. That was just good optics. Send a message. Camille's eyes burned as she sat in silence. She had bled for that hospital, given up holidays, sleep birthdays, and now she was a message. But rage alone wasn't enough. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about exposure. Across town, Jalen Cross prepared a sealed dossier for the press. Camille's name wasn't just a footnote anymore, it was a headline waiting to detonate. And in a high-rise conference room overlooking the lake, Elijah stood with his back to the glass, watching the lights flicker on across the city. Let them think they've won, he said quietly, because when this explodes, it won't just take down Greaves, it'll bury the entire system that allowed him to rise. And as the night deepened, so did the reckoning. The trap wasn't just set. It was already beginning to close, and Malcolm Greaves was still smiling, unaware that every step he took now echoed like footsteps toward a fall from which he would never recover. The Grand Westlake Hotel ballroom shimmered like a palace, its chandeliers casting golden halos over Chicago's elite. Politicians, board members, and health executives mingled with flutes of champagne, their laughter echoing beneath ornate ceilings. At the center of it all stood Malcolm Greaves, adorned in a tailored tuxedo, proudly accepting his 4th consecutive Director of the Year award, Rosebridge Memorial. He declared, raising his glass has achieved something remarkable, profitable care without compromise. We've trimmed the excess, tightened our policies, and delivered results. Applause erupted, cameras flashed, and then just as his award video was about to play, the screens behind him flickered. The room fell quiet. Static gave way to a black screen. Then grainy hospital surveillance footage began to roll. Camille Brooks appeared, rushing to the aid of a bloody, unconscious man, followed by clips of Brittany, ignoring patients, doctors looking away, and finally Malcolm's voice crystal clear. That arrogant black woman needs to learn her place. She saved a damn street rat. Perfect excuse to get rid of her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Greaves stood frozen, the blood draining from his face. Another video rolled Excel spreadsheets showing fraudulent billing. Donation trails from Rosebridge to the city commissioner's PAC emails, with subject lines like suppress complaint, ASAP. And then the final blow, Elijah Turner's voice echoed through the speakers, calm and commanding. My name is Elijah Turner. I was denied treatment by Rosebridge Memorial because I looked like I didn't belong. I would have died, if not for one nurse, Camille Brooks, who disobeyed every policy to do what was right. The room turned to chaos. Reporters shouted. Board members stepped back. Malcolm's eyes darted toward the exits, but uniformed FBI agents were already closing in. Malcolm Greaves said, Agent Douglas badge in hand, "You're under arrest for institutional discrimination, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." Handcuffs snapped shut as cameras captured every second. Across the ballroom, Camille stepped forward. She wasn't in scrubs anymore, but an elegant navy blue suit, her posture unshaken, her eyes blazing with quiet power. "You Greaves," spat. "You orchestrated this circus." Camille tilted her head, a calm smile playing at her lips. "No, Director Greaves. You orchestrated it. I just brought the lights." And as he was dragged past stunned guests, past flashing cameras, past colleagues who now looked at him with revulsion instead of respect, Malcolm realized far too late his empire built on cruelty and fear had just crumbled beneath a woman he had once dismissed as invisible. The headlines spread like wildfire before the ballroom had even emptied. Hospital director arrested at gala. Discrimination, scandal, rocks, Rosebridge Memorial. Hero nurse exposes corrupt medical system. Camille's name now trended alongside Malcolm Greaves's, but for opposite reasons. While she was hailed as a symbol of justice, he became the face of systemic rot. Within 72 hours, the hospital board held an emergency vote and terminated Greaves' contract with immediate effect. His assets were frozen. His home in Lake Forest was seized. His wife filed for divorce by the end of the week, and his children, both in Ivy League schools, issued legal petitions to remove his surname. The city commissioner, once smug and shielded, was swarmed by reporters demanding explanations for the $2.4 million in donations traced back to hospital accounts. She stuttered through her denial before being escorted into a federal vehicle herself. Back at Rosebridge, the once pristine hallways were filled with silence, broken only by whispers and guilt. Staff who had once ridiculed Camille now stared at their shoes, unable to face what they had been complicit in. Even Brittany, whose mocking applause had echoed so loudly weeks earlier, had disappeared from the front desk, her termination quietly posted with the morning memos. Meanwhile, Camille was nowhere to be found in the chaos. She spent those days away from the cameras, staying with her mother in the quiet suburbs, away from the noise, breathing in the calm she had been denied for so long. But she wasn't hiding, she was planning. With Elijah Turner's backing and a coalition of reform-minded medical professionals, Camille began drafting the proposal that would not only restructure Rosebridge Memorial, but serve as a model for equitable compassion. First healthcare nationwide. In an ironic twist, Elijah finalized the acquisition of Rosebridge through Turner Global, buying out the remaining shares from scandal-shaken investors at a fraction of their original value. And when the paperwork was signed, his first executive order was simple: rename the hospital. That same day, the golden plaque reading Rosebridge Memorial was taken down by a crane. In its place, a sleek modern sign gleamed in bold silver lettering, the Camille Brooks Center for Compassionate Medicine. When Camille saw it for the first time, she stood motionless, the crowd behind her quiet with awe. She hadn't fought for glory, but here it was, not as a trophy, but as a promise to the people still waiting to be seen, heard, and healed. And somewhere far away in a cold gray cell, Malcolm Greaves stared blankly at the prison wall, the only sound around him being the slow drip of a leaking faucet and the echo of a name he could no longer silence. 6 months later, the grand reopening of the newly renamed Camille Brooks Center for Compassionate Medicine drew an audience larger than any investor summit Greaves had ever hosted. The once sterile lobby now radiated warmth, artwork from local schools lined the walls. A children's play corner replaced the cold metal benches, and multilingual welcome banners greeted every visitor. Camille, now the appointed medical director, arrived in a tailored white coat with navy trim custom-stitched with her name and title in silver thread. She stepped out of the elevator to applause from patient staff and reporters who had come from across the country to witness the moment. But the transformation went beyond aesthetics. Trisha Lee, the kind-hearted Filipino nurse once fired for cultural misalignment, now ran the reception desk, greeting every patient, insured or not. With the same radiant smile, Dr. Luis Herrera, finally unshackled from fear, led the emergency department, championing policy reforms that prioritized urgency and equity over paperwork and prejudice. Even Curtis, the soft-spoken security guard, who once had to escort Camille out in shame, now walked the halls with quiet pride as the newly promoted head of security, his badge upgraded along with his paycheck. Camille walked past them all, exchanging nods and soft hellos, but her real destination was the roof where a new clinic sign had just been mounted that morning. There, standing beside the gleaming letters that bore her name, was Elijah Turner, dressed in a charcoal suit with his hands in his pockets and a rare smile curving his lips. "You did it," he said simply as she approached. "No," Camille replied, her eyes fixed on the city skyline. "We did it, and we're not done." A courier approached with a sleek envelope inside a notice of a $5 million anonymous donation. Elijah smirked, former Rosebridge sponsors. Guilt is expensive these days. Camille didn't laugh. She was already thinking of how to convert that donation into a mobile clinic for underserved neighborhoods. Downstairs, the waiting list had already surpassed 1,000 names. Word of the center's free care program had spread like wildfire through Chicago's working-class communities. But Camille didn't panic. She smiled. "Good," she whispered. "That's exactly what we want." In that moment, under the sun and the shadow of skyscrapers, she didn't feel like a woman who had been fired. She felt like a woman who had burned a broken house down and rebuilt something worthy of the people inside. Not just a hospital, a sanctuary, and not just for the sick, but for the unseen. It began with a single op-ed in the Chicago Tribune titled, "From Fired to Founder: How Camille Brooks Changed Healthcare," and within 48 hours, national networks picked up the story. News anchors repeated her name with reverence. Universities extended invitations for keynote lectures, and publishing houses scrambled to secure rights to her memoir. But for Camille, the real weight of the revolution came not through headlines, but through handwritten letters. One was from a teenage girl in Detroit. "I never thought someone like me could wear a white coat. Now I know better." Another came from a former patient denied care in Texas, who had watched Camille's gala speech online and wept. The public saw her as a modern Rosa Parks in Scrubs, a woman who defied policy to defend humanity. #Jashed Camille. Model trended worldwide, and healthcare professionals began demanding structural change in city after city. Inside the White House, a special committee was formed to review hospital admission protocols, with Camille's testimony scheduled as a primary case study. But not everyone celebrated. In a suburban strip mall pharmacy just outside of Cleveland, Brittany, the former Rosebridge receptionist stood behind the register. Face flushed each time a customer recognized her from the viral video. She had tried to hide online, changing usernames, deleting posts, but her smug Facebook update, "Rules are rules." Justice Served had been screenshot and circulated as a cautionary tale. Every time Camille's face appeared on the overhead news, Brittany turned the channel. Her shame was permanent, etched into digital memory. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, Camille entered a boardroom at the Brooks Center, flanked by Elijah Turner and Dr. Herrera. Today's agenda, launching a scholarship fund for Black, Latino, and Indigenous medical students, fully funded mentorship, included no strings attached. No future doctor, Camille said, her voice steady, should be told they don't belong in a room simply because of their zip code or skin. Elijah stepped forward. Turner Global is pledging $100 million to expand this model to 5 cities by next year. The room burst into applause, but Camille only nodded. Her mind wasn't on praise. It was on patients still sleeping in cars, mothers still begging for insulin, nurses still choosing between courage and a paycheck. The fight wasn't over, but now she wasn't fighting alone. And with every institution that adopted her model, every headline that said "compassion over policy," Camille knew she wasn't just healing people, she was healing the system itself. 300 kilometers from the shining lights of Chicago, inside a federal correctional facility tucked between cornfields and silence, Malcolm Greaves shuffled through the gray corridors with a mop in hand and bitterness in his breath. Once a man who barked orders in $1,000 suits, he now scrubbed toilets and peeled potatoes in a sweat-stained uniform, ignored by guards and mocked by younger inmates who didn't care about his once lofty title. His cell was bare, except for a small mirror, a cot, and a photo from the newspaper he kept hidden under his mattress. A picture of Camille Brooks standing proudly beneath the new hospital sign that bore her name. Every day he looked at it, and every day it ate at him. When a guard called out, "Greaves, you've got visitors," he jumped to his feet, a flicker of hope breaking through the monotony. But when he entered the visiting room, that hope curdled. Seated across the glass barrier was Curtis Wells, no longer in a security uniform, but in a sharp navy blue blazer and polished leather shoes. His smile was polite but cold. "I came to deliver this in person," Curtis said. sliding an envelope across the table. Greaves picked it up with shaking fingers. Inside was an embossed invitation. You are cordially invited to the unveiling of the Camille Brooks National Fellowship for Medical Equity. Beneath that, a full-page spread from the New York Times, from fired nurse to national icon. How Camille Brooks rebuilt a system from the ashes. Curtis leaned in. Dr. Brooks insisted you get one. Greaves's mouth opened, but no words came. Your wife filed for divorce a week after your arrest. Curtis continued. Your kids changed their last name. The commissioner you protected. She pleaded guilty. Everyone you thought would save you vanished the moment your mask cracked. Greaves finally managed to whisper, "Why are you here?" Curtis tilted his head. Because Camille forgave you. But she never forgot. And neither did we. The former director slumped in his chair, fingers twitching, eyes glassy with defeat. As Curtis stood to leave, he paused. If you had shown her 1 ounce of the respect she deserved, you'd still be sitting in your office right now. Greaves didn't respond. He couldn't. He had built his empire by stepping on the people he thought no one would ever listen to. But the world had listened, and now his name, once carved into marble plaques and private golf clubs, was reduced to a cautionary whisper in a prison lunchroom. And the woman he tried to erase, she had become the legacy. The following year, the Camille Brooks National Fellowship for Medical Equity launched with an energy that rippled across the country. Universities, hospitals, and community organizations are flooded with requests to participate. Camille's vision, once a dream born from adversity, had transformed into a movement, one that couldn't be ignored. On the opening day of the fellowship, Camille stood before a crowd of hopeful students at the University of Chicago Medical School. Behind her, a massive screen displayed photos of students whose lives had been changed by the fellowship. Young women and men, Black, Latino, Indigenous, all beaming in their white coats, standing with pride. She took a deep breath before stepping to the podium, her voice resonating with quiet strength. When I started this journey, she began, I wasn't thinking about a legacy. I was thinking about lives that were forgotten, lives that were dismissed, because they didn't fit some narrow standard. We are here today because every life matters. Every life has a story, a future. The room was silent, the students hanging on her every word. This fellowship is not just for those with privilege, but for those who need an opportunity to prove what they can do with it. It's a promise that no one will ever be denied a chance to save lives because of the color of their skin, the neighborhood they were born in, or the size of their bank account. As the applause erupted, Camille's eyes briefly scanned the crowd, catching sight of Dr. Luis Herrera in the front row, now a senior surgeon, his face glowing with pride. At the back, Tricia Lee, once a dismissed nurse, was helping direct the newly inducted fellows into their next session. Camille knew her work was far from done, but the foundation had been laid. Elijah Turner, who had remained quietly supportive from the sidelines, stood at the back of the auditorium with a satisfied smile. He had been the catalyst for Camille's rise, but she had taken that spark and ignited something that was now spreading like wildfire. His quiet admiration was the only acknowledgement Camille needed. She had built this empire not with a desire for revenge, but with a vision for change. A vision of what could happen when compassion was the foundation, not the exception. Back in Chicago, news outlets began to feature success stories of patients who had received life-saving treatments at the center. Under Camille's leadership, health outcomes improved drastically in the surrounding neighborhoods, proving that access to health care wasn't a luxury. It was a right. Nationally, the Camille Brooks model was being examined for possible adoption in hospitals across the country. Each week brought a new wave of support from unexpected places. Former opponents, skeptics, even political figures all lining up to endorse her approach to healthcare reform. Meanwhile, at the Camille Brooks Center, a large team of volunteers and staff worked day and night, ensuring that the clinic ran smoothly and that no patient was turned away. Camille's schedule was packed, but she always made time for the students, checking in with them, offering advice and mentoring the next generation of doctors and healthcare leaders. She had finally found her calling, not in an office or behind a desk, but in the hearts of the people she served. And with every passing day, she saw her vision taking root. A system built not on exclusion, but inclusion. A future where anyone, no matter their background, could make a difference. In that future, Camille Brooks wasn't just a nurse who saved a life. She was the woman who changed the course of history. A year after the launch of the Camille Brooks National Fellowship for Medical Equity, Camille sat in a conference room in Washington, D.C., surrounded by policymakers, medical experts, and advocates from all over the country. Today, they were drafting the first major piece of legislation aimed at reforming healthcare access and equality across the nation. Camille wasn't just a bystander at this table. She was leading the charge, working tirelessly to ensure that her model of compassion-driven care became the new standard. The room was filled with intense discussions, but Camille remained composed, her hands folded on the table as she listened intently. She had come a long way from the days of humiliation at Rosebridge Memorial, and now, with the support of the Turner Global Health Foundation and a coalition of reform-minded professionals, she was poised to make healthcare history. Elijah Turner, still by her side, watched quietly from across the table, his unwavering faith in Camille's vision proving to be the final push she needed. They were now discussing the crucial aspect of funding, how to ensure that hospitals and medical centers across the country could implement the changes Camille had pioneered. "The model works," Camille stated firmly, her voice carrying the weight of the months of hard work and sacrifice. "But we can't rely on donations alone. This has to be institutionalized. We need universal health care that prioritizes people over profits." Across the room, a senator raised his hand, speaking up. "I agree, Dr. Brooks. The next step is getting bipartisan support. We need to sell this as a solution that benefits everyone, no matter their political beliefs." Camille nodded thoughtfully. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Reform never was. But she also knew that the momentum behind her movement was undeniable. People wanted change, and Camille, with every word she spoke and every action she took, was making that change happen. After hours of intense negotiation and strategy, the group finally arrived at a breakthrough. A draft of the new healthcare bill, one that would ensure universal access, equitable treatment, and a focus on preventative care, was on the table. As the meeting adjourned, Camille couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The fight was far from over, but today a huge step had been taken. Outside, as she walked with Elijah through the bustling streets of D.C., Camille's phone buzzed with an email alert. She glanced down and saw a message from Dr. Luis Herrera. "Camille," it read, "we just received word that the first wave of our fellowship graduates has officially joined the workforce, and they're already changing lives." Camille paused, a smile tugging at her lips. "One life at a time," she whispered. Elijah placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did this, Camille? You built something that will last." She looked out over the skyline, the sun beginning to set behind the Capitol building, casting a golden glow over the city. "No," she said softly, "we did this together." And in that moment, she realized that the journey wasn't just about changing the system. It was about changing the way people saw each other, about realizing that healthcare isn't a privilege, it's a human right. And every step she had taken, every battle fought, was leading toward a future where compassion and equality were the foundation of care, not an afterthought, and with every new development, Camille's vision grew ever more tangible. The Camille Brooks Center expanded beyond its original borders, its influence reaching cities from coast to coast. By now, the fellowship program has graduated over 500 medical professionals who are actively transforming the healthcare system in underserved communities. The center, once a symbol of one woman's fight against an unjust system, had become a beacon of hope for those who had been written off by the system. And the fight Camille had started with one patient, was now being carried forward by an entire generation of doctors, nurses, and activists who believed that healthcare was not a commodity, but a human right. But as Camille stood at the podium, one last time, in a grand ceremony held at the center, receiving a national award for her dedication to healthcare reform, her thoughts weren't on the accolades or the recognition. She glanced out at the faces of the crowd, students she had mentored, patients she had cared for, colleagues who had walked beside her. These were the people who had helped her become more than just a survivor. They had made her a trailblazer. "This journey," she said in her speech, "has never been about me. It's about the people who never had a voice. It's about those who couldn't afford the care they desperately needed, those who were turned away because of who they were or where they came from." Camille paused for a moment, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I stand here today, not because of my strength, but because of all of yours. This change, this revolution was built by all of us together." The crowd erupted in applause, but Camille didn't hear it. She was too focused on the future that was now unfolding before her eyes. With every graduate who took the oath to serve, with every patient who walked through the doors of the center without fear of judgment or exclusion, Camille knew the world was changing. And it was changing because she, with the help of so many others, had shown that when compassion takes the lead, the impossible becomes possible. Later that evening, as Camille walked through the quiet halls of the center, she passed by the display case that held the first white coat she ever wore. She stopped for a moment, remembering the woman who had worn it, unsure, quiet, unheard. And yet, that woman had never imagined that she would become the catalyst for something as vast as this. Camille smiled softly. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong or seeking revenge. It was about building something so great that it couldn't be ignored. And, as the lights dimmed in the center, Camille knew her work wasn't over. There was still much to do, much to fix, but for the first time in years, she felt at peace. The journey had been long, but the future filled with hope and healing had just begun. Camille Brooks' journey shows us that no act of kindness, no matter how small, goes unnoticed. What started as a single moment of compassion snowballed into a movement that redefined what healthcare should be: accessible, compassionate, and just for all. The fight isn't over, but the foundation has been set. As we look toward the future, let us remember that true greatness isn't measured by power or wealth, but by the lives we touch and the change we inspire. If Camille's story has moved you, subscribe to our channel to hear more stories of resilience, justice, and hope. Because when we stand together, we can change the world, one act of compassion at a time.